Welcome to Kevin's Travel Stories, where I try to give you an insight into something that is extraordinary in my life as a travel writer and podcaster. And this week we're talking about something it doesn't get more rarefied than that, which is flying in a private jet. You may have listened to my podcast on whether the business class experience is worth the money, often inflated prices for business class. I also give you lots of tips on how to make a business class affordable. But in this podcast, we're going literally into the stratosphere on what it is like to fly in a private jet. Well, it's quite extraordinary. I got an invite from Diageo when I was editing the Fine Wine and Food Guide. They are a group owned by LVMC, Louis Vuitton Moet Chandon, and they wanted to take a group of journalists to Cognac, there to sample Hennessy. Which is a fantastic premium brand cognac. Hennessy actually has an Irish origin for those listeners from around the world who are interested in such fine drinks. Hennessy is one of those figures that fled Ireland during times of persecution and set up in France. There were many who set up very, very successfully in Bordeaux. Barton, Lynch from Lynch Barge, and Hennessy is perhaps one of the greatest names in the whole world of cognac. So we were very excited when we turned up at Dublin Airport and sat in the lounge. There is now a newer lounge facility. In those days, it was quite a modest building, but that's where the modesty ended, I'd have to say, because a group of the journalists were called to a transport bus and we were taken round the corner to where all the private jets were lined up. Now, in the old days of the rich Celtic tiger, when Europe was booming and Ireland in particular was booming, the private jet area at Dublin Airport rivaled that of Ryanair, which is just round the corner, surprisingly enough. So you go from the cheap and cheerful to the ultra exotic. Now, you don't get anything much more exotic than the plane that we were flying in. We arrived, and at the bottom of the steps of this Dassault Falcon 7X, a fabulous, fabulous plane, was the captain, decked out, and his co-pilot. He welcomed us. He took our bags off us and put them in the hold. I've never known anything quite like it. We went up the steps to the cabin. It's a 16-seater. It had been fitted out by Louis Vuitton Moet Chandon in the ultimate luxury, leather and gold. I have never been in anything quite like it. Very, very luckily, I took my place in the first seat, which was this huge swivel armchair. I'll never forget it. You could move it around. It was absolutely wonderful. The little lid came up so your legs could dangle in the air, and it had gold embossed the clips to keep you firmly in your seat. There was this stunning model, Parisian, who came and obviously served us Moet Chandon champagne and a lovely selection of sushi while we waited as the plane taxied. Now, there was a buzz because none of us had flown on a private jet before. How do you describe the inside of the cabin? So intimate. You turn around and there's your friend sitting in equally luxurious padded leather seats, mahogany wood, deep pile carpets, beautiful decoration all around the cabin. This is not Ryanair, I assure you. And at the end, there was a little area where people were sitting in a group round a table. I was quite happy in my big seat. I got happier when the air hostess came out of the cabin and said, "If someone would like to sit in the jump seat for takeoff, please do." My hand shot up so quick, the champagne went all over the ceiling. And I was there. I got in front of everyone else and was first up. So let me try to set the scene for you. It's quite cramped, the front of a private jet. This Dassault was, it's not huge like a commercial airline. Behind the two pilots Just on their shoulders was a little jump seat that opened from the ground. So you pressed a little switch in the ground and the seats came up. I was sat down, I was strapped in, double strapped in, the door was closed behind, and it was just me and the two pilots. Now, I learned something very interesting as we taxied out past the Ryanair planes, which was very, very amusing, I'd have to say, this sudden switch to ultimate luxury. The pilots were talking in French, which they actually shouldn't have been, because the international language of the airline pilots is English, in fact. But they were two, so I started chatting to them. They were two former military pilots, and they were very, very informative. The first thing as we taxied round towards the main runway was they were pointing rather anxiously and talking in French. My French is quite good, so I managed to get them, and I made an inquisition as to what was wrong. And they said, "Oh, look over there. There are seagulls. Do you not see them? These we have to avoid." And I think they phoned into the watchtower, and a gun was fired, and the various animals took off. So they were talking, they then informed me about how important it was to be really aware of what can happen. The main danger on takeoff is that you may hit a wild bird. And this, of course, could crack a screen. More damaging, it could go into the jet fans and cause havoc there. So they were very aware. It was very interesting watching them do this check. Then they had a very, very detailed checklist. One of the things that came from the space shuttle and the space program of NASA was this detailed check, which was then taken up by airlines after a couple of disasters on the space program. So they inaugurated this check system where you go through a detailed check of every single element. And the co-pilot and his pilot were doing this half in French, half in English, checking for the oil, checking for all the various parameters of the flight. And we were behind a couple of big jets. It's amazing how small a private jet is, only when you see in front of you one of the big commercial planes, which dwarfed us, I'd have to say. But I was very happy sitting there. We were nearly cleared for takeoff. I'm actually a nervous passenger, and I said to the pilot, "What about turbulence? Isn't that isn't that very dangerous when the plane starts jumping up and down?" And he said something that changed my whole flying experience and made me a very, very safe and quiet flyer. And I hope it can have the same effect on you if you're at all nervous. And this is what he said. The plane wings are designed to either, if you could hold them out flat, you could almost join them above the aircraft and join them below the aircraft. I could hardly believe it. He said, the little bits, when you suffer ordinary turbulence, the plane wings are only moving 3 or 4 degrees. They could go up to 90 degrees either way. So this immediately put me to rest and put my mind to rest. And I was reassured about the way that an aircraft is built, way beyond the specs that it normally encounters, even on a turbulent flight. So don't worry about turbulence. The plane can take 10 times what you're probably going through. Finally, the big jet cleared in front of us, and this was a very exciting moment. 2 things happened almost simultaneously, which made this one of the high points of my life, flying in this private jet. Firstly, I got a tap on the shoulder. The beautiful airline pilot, hostess, gave me my glass of champagne, which she topped up and said, "I think you forgot this, sir." So I took my champagne and held it, and just as she retreated and the 2 airline pilots put a hand upon the other and pressed down on the throttle all the way down. Well, I gulped the champagne and looked out of the window as we started to hurtle down the runway. What a thrill! Champagne and the adrenaline rush. It was really just completely one of those high emotion experiences I've ever had in my travel life. I looked out left and right to see if there were any birds flying, seagulls, geese, but the air was clear, and off we shot. And I felt my back being pushed into the jump seat. I had to gulp down a couple more mouthfuls of champagne just so it didn't spill out of the glass. That was a hard thing to do. And we took off, and there was an extraordinary little tremor, and slowly we climbed above the cloud line, and within a few seconds we were floating at 29,000 feet. It was seamless. It was extraordinary. It was celestial. It was unique. We chatted for a while. I was going to extend the time I had as much as possible and milk every minute of it, because I knew the next in line was waiting outside, but they could wait. I was going to get all the information I could out of these two pilots. I asked them what it was like to have been a military pilot and now flying private transport. They said it was probably a little bit boring for them, but it was a very, very well remunerated job. They were well off as a result of their skills, and I had this extraordinary feeling that we were in completely safe hands. Finally, I had to disengage myself. There was a knock on the door. The next journalist was all pumped up to get out there. So I left them, said thank you in French, sat down, and was exposed to more of this tray of beautiful hors d'oeuvres that had been prepared by this beautiful model, the hostess, who really looked after us and was so chic. One standout moment was going to the bathroom. I've never been in the bathroom quite like it. I walked to the end of the plane, mahogany door, opened the door, closed it. Everything inside was gold. Literally, I don't think it was real gold. I think it was gold-plated. But the taps, the door, the toilet seat, it was extraordinary. I just was sort of laughing. It was like being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for an adult. I've never known anything quite like it. Came back, sat down. We arrived at a military airport in Cognac and were whisked away to our chateau for a wonderful experience in Cognac. I'm just going to give you two other things about the private jet experience. The first, when we were returning to Dublin, we were buzzed by a French military plane. I don't know if he were friends of the two pilots, but he went right above us and shot off, and the plane shook, and there was a boom, and I looked out and you saw this plane, and it gave you the insight of the power of fighter jets. This was really quite an extraordinary moment. The second thing was, the next year I was again invited on the same trip. And it just goes to show human nature. When I got on, there were a few journalists there who hadn't been on a private jet before, and they were giddy with excitement. And of course, I was quite blasé by this time. And it struck me how blasé we do get about these wonderful experiences, and how important it is to guard against this. Because we are privileged to live in this time where we fly. Even flying with Ryanair is the most extraordinary experience. They've enabled us to fly all around Europe, and the experience of flying around the world. We're probably in the golden age, because this may not go on with environmental impacts and the whole way that the world is on a path of conservation. So this extraordinary plethora of travel opportunities that we all enjoy now may come to an end. So do make the most of it. And if you ever get a chance to fly on a private jet, and I know they have a very bad press now because of all the justified environmental concerns, but it certainly was one of the standout moments. And sitting up there with my glass of champagne behind the two pilots as we took off from Dublin Airport will live long in my memory.